millionaire husband forced his pregnant ex to sing at his lavish wedding, but her final words shook the guests and made the bride run away in tears. Hi, my beautiful family. It's your Mr. Peter. Before this story begins, I want to wrap your heart in a prayer, soft as a whisper, deep as forever. May the breath of God rest upon your shoulders tonight. May He quiet every noise in your spirit and hold your heart like something priceless, because it is. May He bring peace to the places no one sees, heal the wounds you've hidden behind smiles, and send love to wrap around you when the world feels cold. I pray you feel seen, protected, cherished, and that something beautiful happens to you soon. Something so kind, you know it came from heaven. Now, my beautiful family, this story is close to my heart. Though I'm not speaking today, I wrote every word with love. James will read for me, but the soul behind this story is still mine. And before we begin, can I ask you something softly? Are you getting bored by my introductions? I always try to speak from the deepest part of me. I just hope it still reaches the deepest part of you. Also, I want to gently clear the air. When I describe someone in my stories, I do so with admiration, not separation. My pen is guided by love, always, inspired every day by my beautiful wife Binta, who fills my world with light. And now, all I ask is simple. Please keep me in your prayers. Even one quiet prayer means everything. And my dear family, please don't leave this story in the middle. Every second was written with purpose, and I need you with me from the first word to the last, like the video. Leave a little love in the comments. Let me feel your presence. Let me feel your heart. Now take a deep breath. Let your spirit rest for a moment, and let James begin the story, a story born from my soul and written just for you.
Chapter 1. When Love Was Everything. The moment Abbeth Blasé's voice cut through the champagne-soaked chatter of Manhattan's most exclusive gala, every conversation died. Not gradually, instantly, as if someone had pulled the plug on the entire room's soundtrack. Even the waiters stopped mid-stride, crystal glasses suspended in their hands, mesmerized by the raw honey and lightning that poured from the petite brunette commanding the stage. Russell Ernesto had been drowning in another mind-numbing conversation about shipping routes and quarterly projections, when that voice, that impossible voice, wrapped around his chest like a silk rope and yanked him toward the front of the ballroom. He pushed through the crowd of Manhattan's elite, not caring whose champagne flute he knocked aside or whose expensive shoes he stepped on. Nothing existed except the woman on stage singing as if her heart was bleeding music. She was magnificent and heartbreaking all at once. Emerald silk draped her curves like liquid fire, her dark hair cascading over bare shoulders that trembled slightly with each note. But it was her eyes, those storm-gray eyes that seemed to pierce through the glittering facade of wealth and power to the lonely soul underneath, that made Russell's world tilt off its axis. "Who is she?" he whispered to the man beside him, never taking his eyes off the stage. "Abbeth Blaz," came the reply. "Just signed with Mercury Records. They say she's going to be the next big thing." She already is, Russell thought, feeling something crack open in his chest that had been locked away for 28 years of boardroom meetings and family obligations. When the last note faded into stunned silence, the ballroom erupted into applause that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers. Abbeth smiled, a radiant, slightly overwhelmed expression that made her look younger than her 25 years, and curtsied gracefully before disappearing behind the stage. Russell didn't think. He moved. He found her in the empty corridor behind the ballroom, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, still catching her breath from the performance. Up close, she was even more devastating, a natural beauty that didn't need the layers of makeup and surgery that decorated most women in his world. That was... He started, then stopped, realizing how inadequate words were. Abbeth opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. taking in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, the watch that cost more than most cars, the bearing that screamed old money and older privilege. Her expression cooled slightly, the walls going up with practiced ease. "Let me guess," she said, her voice carrying a slight rasp from singing. "You're somebody important who wants to tell me how I can improve my career, and it just happens to involve dinner at your penthouse." Russell laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. "I was going to say it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard and ask if you'd like to get coffee. Somewhere with fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable chairs, so you'll know I'm not trying to impress you." Something shifted in her expression. "Coffee? There's a 24-hour diner about 6 blocks from here. The coffee tastes like motor oil, but they have the best apple pie in the city." He paused, suddenly uncertain. "I'm Russell, by the way. Russell Ernesto." Recognition flickered in her eyes. The Ernesto name was impossible to avoid in New York's business circles, but instead of the usual calculation or sudden interest, he saw something that looked almost like disappointment. "Right. Shipping empire. Billions of dollars. Family that's been on the social register since the Mayflower." She studied his face. "So why would you want motor oil coffee with someone like me?" "Because," Russell said, stepping closer, "in 30 years of attending these things, you're the first person who's made me forget there was anyone else in the room." For a moment, they just stared at each other. The sounds of the gala seemed to fade away. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the orchestral music from the ballroom. It was just them in the marble corridor, and Russell felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, wind rushing around him. "1 hour," Abeth said finally. "Coffee and pie, but I'm keeping my own cab fare." The diner was everything Russell had promised: harsh fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, and coffee that could strip paint. They sat across from each other in a back booth, sharing a slice of apple pie that was, admittedly, transcendent. "So what's a shipping heir doing at a music industry gala?" Abeth asked, cutting another bite of pie. "Suffering through another networking event to keep my mother happy," Russell admitted. "She thinks I need to expand my social circles beyond maritime law and logistics." He paused. "What about you?" "First big industry event. First big everything, really. 6 months ago, I was singing in subway stations for tips." Abeth's laugh held a trace of disbelief. "Mercury Records heard a video someone posted online, and suddenly I'm the next potential superstar. It's all happening so fast, I feel like I'm going to wake up and be back to busking on street corners." "You won't," Russell said with quiet certainty. "What you have, that voice, that presence, it's not something that just disappears. You sound pretty confident for someone who probably listens to classical music and yacht rock." "Actually, I have terrible taste in music. I once bought a Kenny G album." He grinned at her shocked expression. "But I know authenticity when I see it. Everything about tonight was calculated and artificial, except you. You were real." They talked until the diner began preparing for the breakfast rush, covering everything from Abeth's childhood in a small Pennsylvania town to Russell's complicated relationship with family expectations. She told him about writing songs since she was 12, about working 3 jobs to afford voice lessons, about the rejection letters that papered her tiny apartment's walls. He told her about the weight of inheriting an empire built over 5 generations, about feeling like a prisoner in his own life, about dreams of doing something meaningful that didn't involve quarterly profit reports. When they finally left the diner, dawn was painting the New York skyline in shades of rose and gold. They stood on the sidewalk, suddenly uncertain now that the enchantment of the night was ending. "I should probably head home," Abeth said, though she made no move to hail a cab. "Probably," Russell agreed, not stepping away. "This was," she started. "The best night I've had in years," he finished. She smiled, that radiant, unguarded smile that made his chest tight. Mine too. When he kissed her, soft and tentative under the brightening sky, Russell felt something fundamental shift in his universe. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation. This was the moment his real life began. Neither of them knew that in a penthouse 30 blocks away, Morgana Ernesto was already planning their destruction. Chapter 2. The Iron Fist Strikes. Morgana Ernesto didn't just enter rooms, she conquered them. Standing 6 feet tall in her signature Louboutin heels, with silver hair pulled into a ruthless chignon and eyes like Arctic ice, she had spent 30 years building an empire of fear disguised as respectability. The morning after the gala, she sat behind her mahogany desk in the Ernesto Industries boardroom, reading surveillance reports about her son's midnight diner adventure with the growing fury of a volcanic eruption contained in Italian silk. "Mother, we need to talk." Russell's voice carried a happiness she hadn't heard in years as he strode into her office, still wearing yesterday's tuxedo shirt. For 2 months now, he'd been different. Lighter, defiant, actually smiling during family dinners. She'd suspected a woman, but had hoped it was just another meaningless distraction from his trust fund circle. "Indeed we do." Morgana set down the photographs her private investigator had taken. Russell and the singer laughing over coffee, holding hands on the sidewalk, that devastating kiss at dawn. "Care to explain why my son is gallivanting around Manhattan with subway buskers?" Russell's jaw tightened. "Her name is Abeth, and she's not a busker. She's one of the most talented artists I've ever met. She's a nobody from nowhere trying to social climb her way into our family fortune." Morgana's voice could have cut diamonds. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That you could parade around with this creature without consequences? I'm 28 years old, Mother. I don't need your permission to date someone." "Date?" Morgana laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what you call the house you bought her in Soho? The credit cards with no limits? The way you've been canceling board meetings to attend her recording sessions?" She watched his shock with satisfaction. "Oh yes, Russell. I know everything, including the fact that she's pregnant." The color drained from Russell's face. They'd only learned about the twins 3 days ago, had been planning how to tell his family. "How could you possibly?" "I know she visited Dr. Martinez's office twice last week. I know she's carrying twins, and I know you've already purchased a $5 million engagement ring from Cartier." Morgana stood, moving around the desk like a predator circling wounded prey. "What I don't understand is how my brilliant son could be so spectacularly naive. I love her, Mother, and she loves me. For who I am, not what I represent or how much money I have. Love." Morgana spat the word like a curse. "Love is what destroyed your grandfather's first business when he married that factory worker's daughter. The scandal cost us 3 major contracts and nearly bankrupted the family. Love is what almost ruined your father when he fell for that artist in Paris. I spent 2 years rebuilding our reputation after that mess." Her voice turned arctic. "The Ernesto name has survived 5 generations because we choose power over passion, strategy over sentiment. I will not watch you destroy everything I've built for some subway performer with a pretty voice." Russell's hands clenched into fists. "Abeth isn't going anywhere. I'm going to marry her, and we're going to raise our children together, with or without your approval." "No," Morgana said quietly, and something in her tone made the room temperature drop 10 degrees. "You're not." Before Russell could respond, the office door opened and Lissandra Ernesto entered with the fluid grace of a snake. At 26, she was Morgana's perfect creation, beautiful, brilliant, and completely ruthless. Where Russell had inherited their father's conscience, Lysandra had inherited only Morgana's ambition and her grandfather's capacity for cruelty. "Hello, brother." Lysandra's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "We've been having the most interesting conversation about your girlfriend." "What have you done?" Russell's voice was barely contained fury. "Nothing yet," Morgana replied, settling back into her chair. "But Mercury Records received some very disturbing information about Miss Blissé this morning. Apparently, she has quite the drug problem. Cocaine, specifically. That's insane. Abeth doesn't even drink. Tell that to the NYPD, who found 2 kilograms of cocaine in her car trunk during a routine traffic stop an hour ago." Lysandra examined her perfectly manicured nails. "Such a shame. Career over before it really began." Russell's world tilted sideways. "You planted. This is insane, even for you. She's pregnant with your grandchildren." "Which is exactly why this has to end," Morgana said coldly. "Do you think I'll allow Ernesto blood to be contaminated by some gold-digging nobody? Those children will never carry our name, and she will never be part of this family." "The charges won't stick," Russell said desperately. "She's innocent." "Of course they won't stick. We're not animals, Russell." Morgana's smile was arctic. "The charges will be quietly dropped in a few days, but the damage is done. Mercury Records has already terminated her contract. The story will be buried in tomorrow's business section. Rising star's career derailed by drug charges. Even when she's cleared, no legitimate record label will touch her. She'll be radioactive." Lysandra moved to the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline they owned piece by piece. "We also spoke to her family this morning. Her father's construction company has been hit with some rather serious safety violations. OSHA is being very thorough. Her mother's restaurant failed its health inspection spectacularly. Apparently, they found evidence of severe rodent infestation." "You're destroying innocent people." "We're protecting what's ours," Morgana interrupted. "But this is just the beginning, Russell. We can make her family's problems disappear instantly, or we can bury them so deep they never surface again. The choice is entirely yours." Russell sank into a chair, the weight of their manipulation crushing down on him. "What do you want?" "Senator Whitmore's daughter Isadora is perfect for you," Lysandra continued seamlessly. "Beautiful, well-bred, politically connected. The wedding will cement our position with the new administration. More importantly, it will ensure certain irregularities in our financial records remain undiscovered." "What irregularities?" Russell's voice was sharp. Morgana and Lysandra exchanged a glance. "The Justice Department has been asking uncomfortable questions about our overseas shipping contracts," Morgana admitted. "Nothing illegal, but certain arrangements with foreign officials could be misinterpreted. Senator Whitmore chairs the committee overseeing their investigation. Marriage into his family would provide the political cover we need." "You've been bribing officials." "I've been ensuring smooth business operations in complicated international waters," Morgana corrected. "Unfortunately, the current administration sees legitimate business facilitation as corruption. If they dig deeper, they'll find financial records that could be problematic for the family heir who authorized them." Russell felt sick. "You forged my authorization." "Your digital signatures are remarkably easy to replicate," Lysandra said cheerfully. "Amazing how many documents you've signed, authorizing questionable transactions over the past 5 years. You'd frame your own son to save this family?" Without hesitation. Morgana's eyes were empty of maternal warmth. "You have 24 hours to break things off with your little singer and propose to Isadora, or Abeth Blas and her family will discover that crossing the Ernesto name has consequences that last generations." Russell stared at his mother and sister, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. They weren't just ruthless, They were sociopathic, and they held all the cards. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow night's charity gala, Lysandra said. Isadora will be there, expecting your proposal. Miss Blaset's family's businesses will remain intact until then. After that, she shrugged eloquently. And if I agree to this nightmare, then Miss Blaset gets a generous settlement, Morgana said. Enough to raise her children comfortably, far from New York, perhaps somewhere warm, California, maybe, or the south of France. Russell stood slowly, feeling like an old man. You're asking me to abandon the woman I love and the children she's carrying. I'm asking you to choose between a momentary infatuation and the future of this family, Morgana corrected. Between protecting the people you claim to love and watching them destroyed by forces they can't comprehend or fight. She'll never forgive me. She'll get over it. They always do. Lysandra's laugh was crystalline and cruel. Women like her are survivors, Russell. She'll find another rich man to take care of her bastards. The word hit him like a physical blow. Don't face reality, brother. Either you end this yourself, cleanly, or we end it for you in ways that will haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. Russell walked to the door on unsteady legs, his hand trembling on the brass handle. If I do this, if I sacrifice everything I care about for your political games, I want your word that she and her family will be left alone, completely alone. You have it, Morgana said solemnly. The moment you put that ring on Isadora Whitmore's finger, Abeth Blaset ceases to exist as far as this family is concerned. As the door closed behind him, Morgana turned to Lysandra with satisfaction. That went better than expected. Do you think he'll actually go through with it? He will, Morgana said with absolute certainty. Russell may be weak, but he's not stupid. He knows we always win. Outside in the hallway, Russell leaned against the marble wall and tried to remember how to breathe. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Abeth. Can't wait to tell you the news. It's twins. I love you so much. He closed his eyes and felt his heart shatter into pieces that would never fit back together again. Chapter 3. The Cruelest Sacrifice. 24 hours felt like both an eternity and a heartbeat. Russell sat in his penthouse apartment, staring at the Cartier ring box that had once represented everything beautiful about his future, now feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his hands. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered below, a city full of dreams being born and destroyed with equal cruelty. His phone had been ringing constantly. Abeth, confused and frightened about the drug charges, needing him. Her father, whose construction business had suddenly failed 3 major inspections in one day. Her mother, whose restaurant was being threatened with closure. Each call was another twist of the knife his family had thrust into his chest. The knock on his door came at exactly 8 p.m. Russell knew without looking that it would be Lysandra, punctual as always in her ruthlessness. Time's up, brother. She entered without invitation, elegant in black Chanel, carrying a manila envelope like a weapon. Mother wanted me to remind you about the charity gala tonight. Isadora is waiting. I haven't decided anything yet. Haven't you? Lysandra dropped the envelope on his coffee table. The photographs inside were taken this afternoon. Miss Blaset's younger sister leaving school. Very pretty girl, 15, isn't she? Such a dangerous age. So easy for young girls to make mistakes that ruin their futures. Russell's blood turned to ice. We wouldn't have to do anything directly. Teenagers are naturally rebellious. A few strategically planted drugs in her locker. Some inappropriate photographs that somehow find their way to the internet. Social media can be so unforgiving. Lysandra's smile was poison wrapped in silk. Of course, none of that would be necessary if you simply do what needs to be done. The envelope contained exactly what she'd threatened. Photos of Abith's sister Emma laughing with friends, completely innocent and unaware that monsters were circling her family. Russell felt something die inside him, the last fragment of hope he'd been clinging to. She's just a child. Children are the most effective leverage, Lysandra said matter-of-factly. Break up with the singer tonight, propose to Isadora tomorrow, and the girl never knows she was in danger. Everyone wins. Everyone except Abith. Abith gets to keep her family safe and her children healthy. That's more than most people in her position could hope for. Lysandra checked her diamond watch. You have 2 hours before the gala. I suggest you use them wisely. After she left, Russell sat alone in his apartment, holding the ultrasound photo Abeth had given him that morning. 2 tiny shadows in black and white. His children, who would grow up thinking their father was a monster. He memorized every detail of the image, knowing it might be the only tangible connection he'd ever have to them. His phone buzzed with another text from Abeth. The charges were dropped. I knew you'd fix this somehow. Can't wait to see you tonight. The babies are already lucky to have such an amazing father. Russell's hands shook as he typed his response. We need to talk. I'll come to you. The Soho loft he'd bought her was everything she'd dreamed of. Exposed brick walls, enormous windows, space for a music studio. She decorated it with vintage furniture and plants, turning it into something warm and artistic and completely her. It had been their sanctuary, the place where they'd planned their future and created their children. Now it felt like a mausoleum. Abeth opened the door, glowing with happiness, 6 months pregnant and more radiant than ever. She wore a flowing sundress in pale blue, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, and the joy in her eyes when she saw him was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You look terrible, she said immediately, cupping his face in her hands. Are you sick? Has this whole thing with the charges been worse than you told me? We need to sit down. Something in his tone made her smile falter. She led him to the couch where they'd spent countless evenings, her hand never leaving his arm, as if she could sense him pulling away. What's wrong? Her voice was smaller now, uncertain. Russell had practiced this conversation 100 times, trying to find words that would hurt less. But there were no gentle ways to destroy someone you loved. The only mercy was to make it quick. I can't do this anymore, Abith. The words hung in the air between them like poison. He watched the color drain from her face, saw the moment when his meaning hit her. Can't do what? This. United States. The engagement, the babies, the whole fantasy. He forced his voice to stay steady, emotionless. I made a mistake. Abeth was very still, her hands protective over her belly. What kind of mistake? Thinking that love was enough. Thinking I could abandon my responsibilities, my world, my family's expectations for... He stopped, forcing himself to be cruel. For someone like you. The words hit her like ice water. Someone like me. You have to understand, Abith. I'm an Arnesto. I have obligations that go back 5 generations. A legacy to protect. The lies felt like swallowing glass, but he forced himself to continue. What we had was incredible, but it was never sustainable. Not in the real world. The babies are real. Her voice broke on the words. Our children are real, Russell. Children I can't publicly acknowledge. Each word was designed to wound. Do you have any idea what acknowledging them would cost? What it would do to everything my family has built? Abeth stood abruptly, pacing to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. You're scared. Your family is pressuring you, but we can fight them together. There's no fighting this. The words exploded out of him before he could stop them. Do you have any idea what you're up against? What they're capable of? The charges today were just a warning, Abeth. They can destroy you, your family, everyone you love, and they won't even blink. So you're just going to abandon us, your own children? Russell closed his eyes, drawing on every acting lesson he'd ever had. I'm going to marry Isadora Whitmore next month. The engagement will be announced tomorrow at the charity gala. The silence stretched so long he thought she might not respond. When he finally looked at her, she was staring at him with an expression of such profound betrayal that he wanted to take it all back, to fall to his knees and confess everything. Isadora Whitmore, Senator Whitmore's daughter. It's a good political alliance. She understands the demands of my position in a way that you never could. And our children will be provided for. The words came out mechanically now. You'll receive a settlement, enough to live comfortably, to give them good lives. But they won't carry the Ernesto name. Abeth turned back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. How long have you been planning this? Since the beginning. The lie was like swallowing broken glass. Did you really think I would marry someone from your background? That my family would ever accept a nobody from nowhere as the next generation of our legacy? I'm carrying your children. A mistake we'll both have to live with. She whirled around then, fury blazing in her storm-gray eyes. Get out. Abeth, get out. She was shaking with rage and heartbreak, magnificent in her pain. Get out of my home, get out of my life, and don't you ever come back. You're dead to me, Russell Ernesto. Dead to me and dead to your children. He stood slowly, every movement feeling like he was walking through water. At the door, he turned back one last time, memorizing the way she looked. Proud and broken, and still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I did love you. More than you'll ever know. If you loved me, she whispered, tears streaming down her face, you would have chosen us. The door closed between them with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. Outside on the street, Russell made it exactly 3 blocks before the grief overwhelmed him. He collapsed against a brick wall in an alley, sobbing like a child, his expensive suit soaked with tears for everything he'd just destroyed. The ring box was still in his pocket, the $5 million symbol of promises he'd never get to keep. 3 hours later, he stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, watching Isadora Whitmore smile for the cameras as she modeled the ring that should have belonged to Abeth. The announcement made the front page of the society section the next morning. Shipping heir Russell Ernesto engaged to political royalty. The same day, a small item appeared buried in the business section. Rising singer Abeth Blas drops out of public eye following drug charges. But the real story, the one about sacrifice and survival, about love destroyed by power and the children who would grow up without their father, that story would remain hidden for 16 years, waiting for its moment to shatter the carefully constructed lies that kept the Ernesto empire intact. In her loft, Abeth sat among the ruins of her dreams, one hand on her growing belly, the other holding the ultrasound photos of the children who would never know how much their father had loved them. She whispered promises to them in the darkness, promises that she would be strong enough for all of them, that she would build something beautiful from the ashes of her broken heart. She had no idea that in giving her those promises, she was laying the foundation for the empire that would one day bring the Ernesto family to its knees. Chapter 4. Rising from Ruin. 16 years later, Abeth Blase stood on the stage of the Blue Moon Cafe in Brooklyn, her voice weaving magic through smoke and shadows, transforming a Tuesday night open mic into something transcendent. The years had refined her beauty into something more powerful, high cheekbones carved by struggle, storm-gray eyes that held depths of pain and wisdom, and a presence that commanded attention the moment she touched the microphone. In the back corner booth, Her twin sons watched with the protective intensity that had defined their relationship with their mother since they were old enough to understand that the world could be cruel to extraordinary women who dared to dream alone. Phoenix Blas, 16 and already 6 feet tall, had inherited his father's dark hair and aristocratic bone structure, though his amber eyes burned with a protective fury that Russell Ernesto had never possessed. He was all sharp angles and barely contained energy, a young man who carried himself like he was ready to take on the world for his mother's sake. Tonight his attention was split between the stage and the group of college boys near the bar who had been making increasingly loud comments about his mother's appearance. Beside him, Storm Blas was everything his twin was not. Quiet where Phoenix was explosive, thoughtful where his brother was impulsive. 18 months of fighting leukemia had left him thinner than he should be at 16, his skin pale despite the spring warmth, but his spirit remained unbroken. The initial diagnosis had come just before their 15th birthday, turning what should have been a celebration into the beginning of the family's greatest battle. While Phoenix watched for external threats, Storm watched their mother with the intuitive understanding of someone who had learned too young that life was fragile and precious moments should be treasured. "She's been taking extra shifts here for 3 weeks," Phoenix murmured, his jaw tight as he watched Abeth finish a haunting version of Hallelujah that left the entire cafe silent. "The treatments are getting more expensive." Storm's hand went unconsciously to his chest, where the port for his chemotherapy sat beneath his shirt like a reminder of mortality. "Doctor, Hassan mentioned a new trial yesterday. Something experimental." "How experimental?" Phoenix's voice carried the weight of 16 years of being his brother's protector. "The kind that costs $2 million and isn't covered by insurance." Storm's matter-of-fact tone made the words even more devastating. Phoenix's fists clenched. They'd already lost their apartment twice, had moved 6 times in 10 years chasing cheaper rent and better opportunities. Their mother had sold everything valuable she owned: jewelry, guitars, even the piano where she'd written her first songs. The boys had watched her sacrifice piece by piece of her dreams to keep them afloat, to pay for Storm's treatments, to give them something resembling a normal childhood, despite being raised by a 25-year-old mother who had been abandoned by their billionaire father. "Mom doesn't know I heard her on the phone with the billing department today," Storm continued quietly. "They're threatening to stop the treatments if she can't make a payment plan." On stage, Abeth announced her final song of the night, an original piece she'd written 16 years ago in a Soho loft while her heart was breaking and her world was ending. She'd named it Phoenix Rising, for the mythical bird that emerged stronger from its own ashes, though she'd never told the boys the real inspiration behind their names. Phoenix, for her own rebirth from destruction. Storm, for the tempest that had torn her world apart, but also cleared the way for something new to grow. The song was raw and powerful, telling the story of a woman who had lost everything but found strength she never knew she possessed. As her voice soared through the final chorus, every person in the cafe felt the truth of survival, the beauty that could emerge from the deepest pain. When the last note faded, the applause was thunderous for such a small venue. Abeth smiled and curtsied gracefully, the same gesture she'd made at the Metropolitan Gala so many years ago, though now it carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. She made her way to the boys' table, her steps slightly unsteady with exhaustion. The past few months had taken their toll, working 4 different gigs to pay for Storm's treatments, staying up nights to write new material, fighting insurance companies during the day, and singing her heart out at night. "You were incredible," Storm said, squeezing her hand as she sat down. "You say that every time." Abeth's smile was tired but genuine. "Though I noticed you barely touched your dinner." "I'm fine, Mom." The automatic response of a teenager who had learned to downplay his pain to protect the people he loved. Phoenix caught his mother's eye, a silent communication passing between them. They'd both learned to read Storm's tells, the way he held himself when the pain was bad, the careful movements when his energy was depleted, the forced cheerfulness when he was scared. The chemo appointment got moved to Friday, Abeth said carefully. Dr. Hassan wants to discuss the results from last week's tests. And the new treatment? Storm asked, because he was 16 and brave and refused to pretend he didn't know his own medical situation. Abeth hesitated. For 16 years, she'd tried to shield her sons from the worst of their financial struggles, from the phone calls from creditors, and the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering how she'd make rent. But Storm's illness had stripped away the luxury of protective lies. It's expensive, she admitted. More than we can manage right now. How much? Phoenix's voice was steel. $2 million. The clinical trial is at Johns Hopkins. It's experimental, but Dr. Hassan says it could be a cure, not just a treatment. The number hung in the air between them like a death sentence. $2 million might as well have been $2 billion for a family that had been living paycheck to paycheck for 16 years. There has to be another way, Phoenix said desperately. Fundraising, foundations, something. I've applied to every foundation, every grant program, every charity. Abeth's voice was hollow with exhaustion. We make just enough to disqualify us for assistance, but nowhere near enough to afford treatment. Storm was quiet for a long moment, processing. At 16, he understood mortality in ways his brother still couldn't accept. How long do I have without it? Storm, Abeth started. How long? His storm-gray eyes, so like hers, were calm and accepting. Dr. Hassan says maybe 6 months with the current treatment. A year if we're lucky. Phoenix shot to his feet so violently his chair toppled backward. Number absolutely not. There has to be something. Someone. We're not just going to accept this. Several patrons turned to stare, and Abeth gently pulled him back down. Lower your voice. I won't lower my voice. Phoenix's amber eyes blazed with fury. My brother is dying because we don't have money, and you want me to be quiet about it. I want you to be smart about it, Abeth said firmly. Falling apart won't help Storm. We need to think, to plan. What about? Phoenix stopped abruptly, the unspoken name hanging in the air. For 16 years, the boys had known about their father, only in the abstract. A wealthy man who had abandoned their pregnant mother for a more suitable wife. Abeth had told them his name when they were old enough to ask, but she'd made it clear that Russell Ernesto was not part of their lives, and never would be. No, Abeth's voice was absolute. Never. Mom, he's a billionaire. $2 million is nothing to him. He made his choice 16 years ago. We've made our lives without him, and we'll solve our problems without him. Even if it costs Storm's life. Phoenix's words were brutal but necessary. Abeth flinched as if he'd struck her. You think I haven't thought about it? You think I haven't considered swallowing my pride and begging the man who called us a mistake? Then why? Because he doesn't deserve to know you. The words came out in a rush of pain and anger. Because the man who could walk away from his pregnant girlfriend for political convenience doesn't deserve to play hero now. Because I won't let him ease his conscience by writing a check. Storm reached across the table and took both their hands. Hey, stop fighting. Please. The simple request deflated the tension immediately. This was their family dynamic. Phoenix, the fierce protector, Abeth, the determined survivor, and Storm, the peacemaker who held them together. I'm sorry, Abeth whispered, squeezing Storm's thin fingers. I'm scared too. I know, Mom, but we'll figure something out. We always do. The optimism in his voice broke her heart, because at 16, Storm still believed in miracles. He didn't know that she'd already exhausted every option, that she'd been awake for 72 hours straight, trying to find solutions that didn't exist. What he also didn't know was that she'd been thinking about Russell Ernesto for weeks now, torturing herself with scenarios where she called him, where she begged him for help, where she sacrificed her last shred of dignity to save their son's life. But every time she imagined hearing his voice again, she remembered the way he'd looked at her in that Soho loft, like she was something that had inconveniently stuck to his shoe. She remembered his words, "Children, I'm not prepared to claim. You don't belong in my world. A mistake we'll both have to live with." Number, she would find another way. She had to. That night, after the boys were asleep in their tiny studio apartment in Queens, Abeth sat at her kitchen table with medical bills spread before her like tarot cards predicting doom. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of 8 million dreams being born and dying every moment. She pulled out her laptop and began researching one more time. Clinical trials, experimental treatments, anything that might offer hope without destroying what remained of her pride. But as the hours passed and the options dwindled, one name kept echoing in her mind like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. Russell Ernesto, the man who had loved her with devastating intensity and abandoned her with equal cruelty. The father who had never sent a birthday card or a Christmas gift, who had never once asked about the children he'd helped create. The man who could save Storm's life with a signature on a check. As dawn broke over Queens, painting her tiny kitchen in shades of hope and desperation, Abeth finally admitted the truth she'd been fighting for weeks. She would do anything to save her son, even if it meant facing the man who had destroyed her once and might do it again, even if it meant begging Russell Ernesto for mercy he'd never shown her before. Chapter 5. The Ultimate Humiliation. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Abeth's life into before and after. Storm had been in the hospital for 3 days, following a particularly brutal round of chemotherapy, his 16-year-old body struggling against both the cancer and the cure. Phoenix hadn't left his twin's bedside except to shower, and Abeth had been surviving on vending machine coffee and the kind of desperate prayers that only parents of sick children understood. She almost threw the cream-colored envelope away, thinking it was another medical bill she couldn't afford to open. But something about the weight of the paper, the expensive feel of it between her fingers, made her pause. The return address was embossed in gold, Ernesto Entertainment Enterprises. Her blood turned to ice. Inside, the letterhead was pristine, professional, and devastating in its elegance. The signature at the bottom belonged to Morgana Ernesto, a name that had haunted Abeth's nightmares for 16 years. Dear Miss Blase, I trust this letter finds you well, despite the unfortunate circumstances I understand have befallen your family. It has come to my attention that you are once again performing publicly, and I must say the years have been kind to your talents. I am writing to offer you a unique business opportunity. As you may be aware, my son Russell is finally marrying Senator Whitmore's daughter, Isadora, in what promises to be the social event of the decade. The wedding will be held at the Ernesto estate in the Hamptons and will be broadcast live on national television as part of the senator's presidential campaign strategy. We are in need of entertainment for the ceremony, specifically a singer capable of performing during the processional and reception. Given your history with the groom, I thought this opportunity might appeal to your sense of irony. The standard compensation for such an exclusive performance would be substantial. Let's say $2 million. I trust you'll find this sum adequate for whatever pressing financial needs you may currently face. Should you choose to accept this engagement, you would be required to perform 3 songs during the ceremony and an additional set during the reception. The repertoire will be selected by our event coordinator, and will consist entirely of love songs appropriate for a wedding celebration. I should mention that this offer expires in 24 hours and is non-negotiable. You will perform at my son's wedding, watching him marry the woman he chose over you, or your son will continue to receive treatment that we both know is proving insufficient for his condition. The choice, as always, is entirely yours. Sincerely, Morgana Ernesto, Chairman, Ernesto Industries. Abeth read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated her shock. When they did, she had to grip the hospital waiting room chair to keep from collapsing. $2 million, the exact amount Dr. Hassan had quoted for Storm's experimental treatment. The cruelty was so exquisite, so perfectly calculated, that she almost had to admire its artistry. Whether Morgana knew the precise cost or had simply chosen a sum large enough to be irresistible, the effect was the same. The woman who had destroyed her life 16 years ago was offering exactly what Abeth needed most in exchange for the most humiliating performance imaginable. "Mom?" Phoenix appeared beside her, exhaustion written in every line of his 16-year-old face. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, she had. "Nothing, sweetheart. How's Storm?" "Sleeping. The doctors say his counts are improving." Phoenix studied her face with the intensity that came from years of being the man of the house despite his age. "Mom, what's in that letter?" Abeth folded the paper carefully, her hands remarkably steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. "Just work stuff. A potential gig." "What kind of gig pays enough to make you look like that?" "Smart boy. Too smart for his own good, just like his brother." "The expensive kind." "How expensive?" Abeth looked at her son, this beautiful, fierce young man who had spent his entire life protecting his family, and realized she couldn't lie to him. Not about this. The kind that would pay for Storm's treatment. Phoenix went very still. "What do you have to do?" "Sing at a wedding." "Whose wedding?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Abeth had never told the boys the details of their father's marriage, had never explained how Russell had left her for Isadora Whitmore, just weeks after abandoning his pregnant girlfriend. She'd told them he was married, that it happened quickly after their breakup, but she'd spared them the specifics that would have made his betrayal even more devastating. "Your father's," she said quietly. Phoenix stared at her for a long moment, processing. Then, "He's getting married again." This is his first wedding. To the woman he left me for." The words tasted like poison. "They've been engaged for 16 years. Apparently, they're finally making it official. And his mother wants you to sing at their wedding." Phoenix's voice was flat with disbelief. "The woman who destroyed your career wants you to perform love songs while your ex-fiancé marries someone else. For $2 million. Which is exactly what Storm needs for the treatment." "Yes." Phoenix was quiet for a long time, staring at the hospital floor. When he finally looked up, his amber eyes were blazing with fury. "This is sick. Even for them, this is sick." "It's business," Abeth said, though the words felt hollow. "Everything is business to people like the Ernestos. You can't do it." "I can't not do it." The admission felt like admitting defeat. "Storm is dying, Phoenix. This treatment could save his life." "There has to be another way." "There isn't." The words came out sharper than she intended. "Do you think I haven't looked? Do you think I haven't exhausted every option, every possibility, every shred of hope? This is it. This is the only chance Storm has." Phoenix stood abruptly, pacing the small waiting room like a caged animal. "So you're going to humiliate yourself for their entertainment? You're going to stand there and watch that bastard marry someone else while you sing about love and happiness?" "I'm going to save my son's life," Abeth corrected firmly. "Everything else is just noise." What about your dignity? Your self-respect? Dignity doesn't cure cancer, Phoenix. The words were brutal but true. Self-respect doesn't pay for experimental treatments. Sometimes being a mother means swallowing your pride so completely it feels like drowning. Phoenix stopped pacing, his hands clenched into fists. I hate him. I hate both of them for this. Hate is a luxury we can't afford right now. Then what? You're just going to smile and sing pretty songs while they torture you? Abeth stood and pulled her son into a fierce hug, feeling how much he'd grown, how much he'd had to grow up too fast. I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring your brother home healthy, even if it destroys you. I was destroyed 16 years ago, she said quietly. Everything since then has been rebuilding. This is just another renovation. They stood together in the sterile hospital corridor, holding each other against the weight of impossible choices. Around them, the hospital hummed with its own rhythm of hope and despair, of families fighting battles they never imagined they'd have to fight. There's something else, Abeth said finally. The wedding is being broadcast live on national television, political reasons according to the letter, which means millions of people will watch you perform at your ex-fiancé's wedding. Phoenix's voice was hollow. They're not just humiliating you privately. They want the whole world to see it. Yes, Jesus, Mom, these people are monsters. These people have what I need to save Storm. Abeth pulled back to look at her son. Can you handle it? Can you and Storm handle watching me do this? Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that no 16-year-old should possess. We'll handle whatever we have to handle, just like we always do. I love you so much. I know, and I love you, which is why... He paused, something shifting in his expression. Which is why I'm going to be there. What? At the wedding? If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone. Absolutely not. I won't have you subjected to... Mom. Phoenix's voice was gentle but implacable. You've protected Storm and me our entire lives. Now let me protect you. In the end, Abeth called the number on Morgana's letter that evening. The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and utterly without warmth. Miss Blase, I trust you've considered our offer. I accept your terms. Excellent. The wedding is in 3 weeks. You'll receive detailed instructions regarding repertoire, wardrobe, and logistics. I trust you understand that any deviation from the agreed-upon performance will result in immediate termination of your compensation. I understand. And Miss Blas, I do hope you'll give the performance of your lifetime. After all, so much depends on it. The line went dead, leaving Abeth alone with her decision and the terrible knowledge that she had just agreed to the most exquisite form of torture ever devised. But as she looked through the window at her sons, Phoenix reading to Storm from a book of poetry, both of them laughing at something on the page, she knew she would have agreed to far worse. Love, she had learned, was not always beautiful. Sometimes it was survival. Sometimes it was sacrifice, and sometimes it was walking into hell with your head held high because the people you loved were counting on you to bring back salvation, even if it cost you everything else you had left to lose. Chapter 6. The Performance That Broke the World. The Arnesto estate sprawled across 50 acres of pristine Hampton's coastline like a monument to generational wealth. Ancient oak trees lined the mile-long driveway, their branches forming a cathedral canopy that filtered the late afternoon sunlight into golden coins scattered across the manicured lawns. The main house, a 30-room Georgian masterpiece, had hosted presidents and princes, but never had it prepared for an event quite like this. 300 of America's most powerful people filled white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing the Atlantic Ocean. Senators and Supreme Court justices sat beside tech billionaires and old money dynasties, while 12 camera crews positioned themselves to capture every moment for the 50 million viewers expected to tune in. This wasn't just a wedding. It was political theater on the grandest scale, cementing alliances that would shape the next decade of American power. At the back of the crowd, in a simple black dress that cost less than most guests' shoes, Abeth Blas stood beside her makeshift stage and tried to remember how to breathe. 3 weeks of preparation had done nothing to ready her for this moment. She'd lost 15 pounds from stress, hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night, and had to ice her hands each morning to stop them from shaking. Phoenix sat in the very last row, wearing the only suit he owned, a thrift store find that Abeth had tailored herself. His amber eyes never left his mother, and his presence was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth, instead of floating away on a tide of surreal horror. The string quartet began the processional, and Abeth's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. She'd been given 3 songs to perform, one during the processional, one during the ceremony, and one for the reception. Each had been carefully selected by Morgana's event coordinator to maximize emotional torture. Love songs that would force Abeth to watch the man who destroyed her marry someone else while singing about eternal devotion. The wedding party began their procession down the white carpet that had been unfurled from the house to the altar overlooking the ocean. Groomsmen in perfectly tailored tuxedos, bridesmaids in pale pink silk that probably cost more than Abeth's monthly rent. The photographer's camera flashes created a strobe effect that made the whole scene feel like a fever dream. Then the music changed, and Abeth knew it was time. She stepped to the microphone as the bridal march began, her voice joining the strings in a hauntingly beautiful version of At Last. The irony wasn't lost on her, singing about finding love at last while watching her own love story's funeral procession. But as the first notes left her lips, something shifted. The years of struggle, of rebuilding herself from ashes, of becoming someone stronger than the broken girl who'd been abandoned in a Soho loft, all of it poured into her voice. She wasn't the same woman who'd been destroyed 16 years ago. She was a survivor, a warrior, a mother who would walk through fire to save her child. The guests fell silent, phones lowering, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Even the camera operators seemed to forget they were filming as Abeth's voice wove through the late afternoon air like liquid gold. And then she saw him. Russell Arnesto stood at the altar in a tuxedo that probably cost more than Storm's monthly medical bills, his dark hair now touched with silver at the temples, his face more lined but still heartbreakingly familiar. For a moment, just one devastating moment, their eyes met across the crowd of Manhattan's elite, and 16 years collapsed into nothing. He looked exactly like she remembered and completely different all at once. The boyish charm had been refined into something more mature, more complicated. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, the same amber-flecked brown that Phoenix had inherited, now filled with an expression she couldn't quite name. Shock, yes. Recognition, certainly. But underneath it all, something that looked almost like relief. Abeth forced herself to look away, to focus on the ocean beyond the altar, on anything except the man who had once promised her forever, and delivered devastation instead. She finished, "At last," with her voice never wavering, though her hands shook against the microphone stand. The bride appeared at the back of the aisle like something from a fairy tale. Isadora Whitmore was undeniably beautiful, tall, blonde, perfectly proportioned, wearing a dress that had probably been featured in Vogue. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world, never questioned whether she deserved the life being handed to her. As Isadora walked down the aisle, Abeth began her second song, "Someone Like You." The choice was Morgana's masterstroke of cruelty, forcing Abeth to sing about letting go of lost love while watching her own lost love marry another woman. But as the familiar melody began, something inside Abeth crystallized into perfect, devastating clarity. 16 years of suppressed rage, of swallowed pride, of nights spent crying herself to sleep while her children slept in the next room, all of it transformed into a moment of terrible, beautiful truth. She was going to tell her story. The original lyrics started to change, so subtly at first that only the most careful listeners noticed. Instead of singing about being uninvited and unexpected, she sang about being forgotten and abandoned. Instead of wishes for happiness, she sang about promises broken and children denied. The camera crews sensed something shifting. Producers in the mobile units outside began frantically switching between shots. Abeth at the microphone, Russell's face going pale at the altar, Isadora still walking down the aisle in blissful ignorance of the bomb about to explode. And then Abeth reached the chorus, and instead of the expected lyrics, these words poured out with devastating clarity. I gave you everything, my heart, my soul, my dreams. 2 babies growing safe inside my womb. But money mattered more than love, it seems. You chose your mother's gold over me and you. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Guests gasped audibly. Phones snapped up to record. The camera operators, trained to capture drama, zoomed in on Russell's face as the color drained from it completely. Sometimes it lasts in love, but sometimes it hurts instead. Sometimes love dies when cowards choose their chains. Sometimes the fathers of your sons might as well be dead. When fear wins out and only heartbreak remains. Isadora had stopped walking. The string quartet had stopped playing, leaving only Abeth's voice echoing across the stunned crowd. In the back row, Phoenix was on his feet, his face blazing with fierce pride, as his mother finally told the world what the Ernesto family had done to her. Abeth's voice grew stronger with each word, 16 years of suppressed truth pouring out, like a dam bursting. You'll never know your sons, the boys you threw away. Phoenix with your eyes, storm with my soul. They ask about their father, but what am I to say? That love meant nothing when you chose control. 50 million viewers watched in transfixed silence as the most viral moment in social media history unfolded in real time. Wedding Singer Revenge began trending within minutes, the hashtag spreading faster than wildfire across every platform. But the most devastating moment came when Abeth locked eyes with Russell during the final chorus and sang directly to him. I gave you everything and got abandonment, but I survived and built a life alone. Our children are magnificent despite your banishment, and I am stronger than I've ever known. The song ended in complete silence. 300 of the most powerful people in America sat frozen, phones recording, witnessing the most spectacular public confrontation in recent memory. Isadora stood halfway down the aisle, her perfect composure finally cracking as she realized what she'd just heard. The cameras captured everything, her shock, her dawning understanding, the way she slowly turned to look at the man she was supposed to marry. Russell was staring at Abeth with an expression of such naked longing and regret that it was almost painful to witness. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words that looked like, I'm sorry, and my children. And God, what have I done? In the terrible silence that followed, Isadora walked slowly to the altar. The microphones picked up her voice clearly as she looked at Russell and said, You have children. I dot. Russell's voice cracked. I didn't know. I never knew their names. I never... He stopped, the weight of 16 years of willful ignorance crashing down on him. Isadora looked from Russell to Abeth, understanding finally dawning. You're still in love with her. It wasn't a question. The entire world could see the truth written across his face. With movements that seemed to happen in slow motion, Isadora removed the $5 million engagement ring from her finger. The cameras zoomed in as she placed it gently in Russell's palm. "I won't marry a man whose heart belongs to someone else," she said with quiet dignity. "I won't marry a man who abandoned his children for political convenience." She turned to face the crowd, her voice carrying clearly in the shocked silence. "There will be no wedding today." As she walked back down the aisle, her head held high, 50 million people watched the most expensive wedding in New York history collapse in real time. Social media exploded. News alerts began pinging on phones around the world. The hashtag number sign "wedding singer revenge" crashed Twitter's servers twice in the first hour. But Abbott barely noticed the chaos erupting around her. She set down the microphone with hands that were finally, miraculously steady, and walked toward her son. Phoenix met her halfway, wrapping her in a fierce hug as camera flashes exploded around them. "Mom," he whispered, "that was the most badass thing I've ever seen in my life." Behind them, the carefully orchestrated world of the Ernesto family began to crumble, one viral video share at a time. Chapter 7. Empire Crumbles. Within 6 hours of the wedding disaster, the hashtag "wedding singer revenge" had been tweeted over 2 million times. By the end of the weekend, the number had reached 15 million. The video of Abath's performance crashed YouTube's servers twice before they could implement emergency capacity protocols. TikTok users created thousands of response videos analyzing every note, every facial expression, every camera angle. Instagram influencers dissected Russell's devastated expression frame by frame. Facebook groups dedicated to dissecting the scandal sprouted like wildflowers after rain, with some accumulating over 100,000 members in the first week. The Ernesto family's public relations team, normally capable of spinning natural disasters into marketing opportunities, found themselves completely overwhelmed. Their phones rang incessantly with interview requests from every major network, international news outlets, and entertainment shows. TMZ offered 7 figures for exclusive access to behind-the-scenes footage. The BBC wanted to create a documentary. Netflix announced they were fast-tracking a limited series. In her modest Queens apartment, Abith sat on her second-hand couch with Phoenix and Storm, watching their lives become international news. Storm had been released from the hospital that morning, his latest test results showing improvement that Dr. Hassan called remarkable, though they all knew it was temporary without the experimental treatment. "Mom, you're famous," Storm said, scrolling through his phone with the kind of energy she hadn't seen in months. "Like, really famous. Lady Gaga shared your video. Beyoncé posted about you on Instagram. Taylor Swift called you an inspiration to every woman who's ever been underestimated." Phoenix was less impressed with the celebrity attention and more focused on the practical implications. "The recording offers are insane. Universal, Sony, Atlantic, they're all calling. But Mom, some of these contracts—" He held up his phone. "This one is offering 20 million for a 3-album deal." Abeth stared at the number on the screen, trying to process it. 24 hours ago, she'd been a struggling single mother performing at open mic nights for tips. Now, record executives were engaging in bidding wars over her future. "There's more," Storm added, his gray eyes bright with excitement. "Concert promoters are offering to book entire world tours. The Madison Square Garden people want to give you a residency. And Mom—" He paused dramatically. "Oprah's people called. Oprah. She wants to interview you for her Super Soul Sunday special. Exclusive access, full hour dedicated to your story." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. 16 years ago, Morgana Ernesto had destroyed Abeth's career with a few well-placed phone calls. Now, in trying to humiliate her, Morgana had accidentally created the most compelling redemption story in recent memory. While Abeth's star was rising faster than a SpaceX rocket, the Ernesto empire was experiencing its own spectacular crash. The family's stock price had dropped 30% overnight as investors fled anything associated with the wedding disaster. Their shipping contracts were being reassessed by nervous partners who didn't want to be associated with a family that abandoned pregnant girlfriends for political gain. More devastating was the criminal investigation that had been building for months and was suddenly fast-tracked due to public pressure. FBI agent Sarah Chen had been building a case against Ernesto Industries for 18 months, following a paper trail of suspicious overseas transactions and questionable business practices. The viral wedding video hadn't started her investigation. It had given her the public attention and political support she needed to obtain the warrants that had been stalled in bureaucratic red tape for months. The media firestorm created by #WeddingSingerRevenge gave prosecutors the political cover they needed to move against a powerful family. Within 72 hours of the wedding disaster, federal judges who had been hesitant to sign warrants against the politically connected Ernestos suddenly found themselves under intense public scrutiny. What they found exceeded Chen's wildest expectations. Morgana's home office contained financial records that any competent accountant would have destroyed years ago. Detailed spreadsheets showing money laundering operations, bribery schedules for port officials in 12 countries, and most damning of all, evidence of the systematic destruction of business competitors through illegal means. But the real treasure trove was in Lysandra's apartment. Lysandra Ernesto, brilliant and ruthless, had kept meticulous records of every dirty trick the family had employed over the past decade. She'd documented the destruction of Abeth's career 16 years ago, including photographs of the planted drugs and copies of the forged evidence. She'd kept detailed files on dozens of other victims, business owners who'd been bankrupted for refusing to sell, politicians who'd been blackmailed into compliance, journalists who'd been silenced through intimidation. Most shocking of all, they found evidence that Morgana hadn't just embezzled from the company. She'd been systematically looting the family trust fund that was supposed to provide for future generations of Ernestos. $200 million had been funneled through a network of shell companies into accounts controlled solely by Morgana and Lysandra. She's been stealing from her own family for 20 years, Agent Chen explained to her supervisor. The trust fund that was supposed to be worth $500 million. It's got maybe 50 million left in it. She's been using family money to fund illegal operations and then covering it up by having the company absorbed the losses. By Thursday, both Morgana and Lysandra were in federal custody, charged with money laundering, tax evasion, bribery, conspiracy, and racketeering. The RICO charges alone carried potential sentences of 20 years each. Russell, meanwhile, had disappeared entirely from public view. The man who had stood at that altar just 5 days ago watching his world implode was now holed up in a modest hotel room in Connecticut, having fled the media circus surrounding his family. His phone had been ringing non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, old friends wanting to distance themselves, new enemies wanting to pile on. But the calls he wanted most never came. He tried reaching out to Abeth a dozen times, but her number had been changed. He'd attempted to contact Phoenix and Storm through social media, but their accounts had been set to private. He'd even called Dr. Hassan's office, hoping to contribute anonymously to Storm's treatment, only to be told that someone had already paid for the experimental therapy in full. Who? He'd asked desperately. I'm not at liberty to say, the billing coordinator had replied, but your son's treatment begins Monday. Your son. The words had hit him like physical blows. He had sons, two 16-year-old boys who carried his DNA and Abeth's strength, who had grown up without him because he'd been too cowardly to fight for them. The hotel room's television provided constant updates on his family's downfall. Legal experts debated whether the evidence would hold up in court. Financial analysts predicted Ernesto Industries would be bankrupt within 6 months. Social media influencers created conspiracy theories about what other secrets the family might be hiding. But the story that dominated every channel was Abeth's remarkable transformation from abandoned single mother to international sensation. The recording contract she'd ultimately signed, with a smaller, artist-friendly label that gave her complete creative control, was being called revolutionary. Her first album, tentatively titled Phoenix Rising, was already being pre-ordered in record numbers despite not being finished yet. Concert venues around the world were competing to host her first international tour. More importantly, at least to Russell, she was finally getting the recognition she deserved 16 years ago. Music critics were calling her voice transcendent. Rolling Stone had put her on their cover with the headline, "The Mother Who Broke the Internet." The New York Times Arts section featured a full-page profile calling her the most authentic artist of her generation. Everything she'd lost because of his family's cruelty was being restored 100-fold. But it was the interview she gave to Anderson Cooper that finally broke Russell completely. "Do you forgive him?" Cooper had asked, leaning forward with the intensity that made him one of television's best interviewers. Abeth had been quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and painfully honest. "I forgive the 28-year-old boy who was scared and manipulated by people more ruthless than he knew how to handle," she said. "But I'll never forgive the man who walked away from his children, who could have reached out any time in 16 years and chose not to, who let his sons grow up believing their father didn't want them. And if he tried to contact you now..." "Now?" Abeth's smile was sad but resolute. "Now I have more important things to focus on than the man who broke my heart. I have sons to raise, music to make, and a life to live. He made his choice 16 years ago. I've made mine every day since." The interview aired on a Wednesday night and was watched by 43 million people. Russell turned off the television and sat in the silence of his anonymous hotel room, finally understanding the true scope of what he'd lost. It wasn't just Abeth, though losing her had been devastating enough. It wasn't just his children, though knowing Phoenix and Storm had grown up without him was agony. It was the life he could have had, the man he could have been, the father, the husband, the human being who chose love over fear, courage over convenience, authenticity over approval. For 16 years he'd told himself he'd made the only choice possible, that protecting Abeth from his family's cruelty had been noble, even if she couldn't understand it, that staying away from his children had been mercy, not cowardice. But watching her strength, her grace, her refusal to be broken by anything life threw at her, he finally admitted the truth. He'd been wrong about everything. Abeth Blas didn't need his protection. She never had. She was stronger than he'd ever imagined possible. And now, thanks to his family's final act of cruelty, the whole world knew it too. Outside his hotel window, Connecticut hills rolled away into the distance, peaceful and anonymous. Somewhere out there, his sons were probably watching their mother become the international sensation she'd always been destined to be. Somewhere out there, the woman he'd loved and lost was building the empire that should have been theirs together. And Russell Ernesto, heir to nothing now that his family's crimes had been exposed, sat alone in a hotel room and finally began to plan how he might earn the forgiveness he had no right to ask for. Chapter 8. The Father's Awakening. 3 months after the wedding disaster, Russell Ernesto sat in Dr. Elizabeth Reyes's office for what would be his final therapy session. The room was nothing like the opulent spaces he'd grown up in. Simple furniture, plants that needed actual care, books with worn spines that had clearly been read multiple times. It was the kind of authentic, lived-in space that his mother would have dismissed as common, which was exactly why it had become his sanctuary. "How are you feeling about ending our sessions?" Dr. Reyes asked, her pen poised over the legal pad where she'd been documenting his journey for the past 3 years. Russell considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, he'd started therapy as a last resort, desperate to understand why he felt like he was drowning in his own life. He'd been having panic attacks during board meetings, insomnia that left him exhausted, and a sense of hollow purposelessness that money couldn't cure. Terrified, he said honestly, but ready. "For the first time in my adult life, I think I understand who I am when I'm not trying to meet someone else's expectations." "And who is that?" "Someone who wants to spend the rest of his life earning forgiveness he may never receive." Dr. Reyes smiled. "That's profound growth, Russell. 6 months ago, you would have said you wanted to earn forgiveness you deserved. The distinction is everything." She was right. The man who had entered therapy 3 years ago had been full of justifications for his choices, explanations for his cowardice, rationalizations for his abandonment of Abeth and their children. It had taken 2 years of difficult sessions to strip away the protective narratives he'd built around his actions and face the brutal truth. He had chosen the easy path over the right one, and 3 people he loved had paid the price. The revelation that Abeth had children, his children, had been the catalyst that finally broke through his defenses. For 16 years, he told himself that walking away had been merciful, that his absence protected them from his family's toxicity. Learning their names, Phoenix and Storm, had shattered that comfortable delusion. "Have you decided what you're going to do next?" Dr. Reyes asked. Russell nodded, reaching into his briefcase for a folder thick with documents. "I've been working on something, a foundation, the Phoenix and Storm Foundation for single parents facing medical crises." Dr. Reyes accepted the folder, scanning the mission statement he'd spent weeks crafting. The foundation would provide immediate financial assistance for families dealing with childhood cancer, covering not just medical costs but also living expenses, childcare, and educational support. The initial endowment was substantial, $50 million from Russell's personal trust fund, money that had been protected from his family's criminal activities. "This is impressive," she said, reading through the detailed plans. "You've thought of everything. Emergency grants, long-term support, advocacy programs. The idea came from Storm's medical records," Russell admitted. "After the wedding, I hired a private investigator, not to intrude on their privacy, but to understand what they'd been through. I needed to know what my absence had cost them." The investigator's report had been 300 pages of documentation that read like an indictment of his character. Hospital visits that Abeth had navigated alone, insurance battles she'd fought without support, nights when she'd worked 4 different jobs to pay for Storm's treatments while Phoenix took care of his sick brother. There were times when they were 24 hours away from losing their apartment, Russell continued, his voice tight with self-recrimination. Times when Abeth had to choose between buying Storm's medication and buying groceries. My son was sick, and I was living in a penthouse, completely oblivious to their suffering. "You didn't know." "I could have known," he interrupted firmly. "I should have known. I was their father, and I chose ignorance because it was convenient." Dr. Reyes set down the folder. "And now I'm trying to become the man they deserve to have in their lives. Even if it's too late for them, maybe it's not too late for other families." The foundation was just one part of Russell's transformation. 3 years ago, when he'd first started therapy and begun questioning his family's methods, he'd quietly moved his personal trust fund into independent accounts, a decision that had seemed paranoid at the time but now looked prescient. While his mother and sister faced financial ruin from their crimes, Russell's inheritance remained untouchable, protected by legal structures his grandfather had created decades earlier. For the past year, he'd been using that protected wealth carefully, volunteering at children's hospitals around the city, reading to young patients, playing games with siblings stuck in waiting rooms, helping families navigate the labyrinthine medical system. He'd funded the construction of 3 schools in underserved communities. He'd quietly paid off medical debt for dozens of families, always anonymously, never seeking recognition. "There's something else," he said, reaching for another document. "I've been trying to figure out how to help Storm specifically, without overstepping boundaries." The second folder contained detailed research into Storm's condition and the experimental treatment he was receiving. Russell had consulted with the world's leading pediatric oncologists, funding research into new therapies, supporting clinical trials that might benefit other children facing similar diagnoses. "I can't undo 16 years of absence," he said, "but I can make sure that no other child dies because their family can't afford treatment." Dr. Reyes studied him carefully. "And what about direct contact? Have you considered reaching out to them?" Russell was quiet for a long moment. "For 3 years I told myself that staying away was mercy, that disrupting their lives with my presence would be selfish. But the truth is, I was terrified of their rejection. It was easier to help from a distance than to face the consequences of my abandonment. And now I realize that hiding behind anonymous charity was just another form of cowardice. They deserve the chance to reject me to my face, if that's what they choose." The question hit him like a physical blow. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? You've spent 3 years in therapy learning to be a better person, but you're still making decisions for other people without consulting them. How do you know they wouldn't want to meet you? How do you know Abeth wouldn't want to see who you've become?" Russell stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan street where real people lived real lives, unprotected by trust funds and family names. "Because I watched her interview with Anderson Cooper. Because I heard the pain in her voice when she talked about the father who abandoned his children. Because I've forfeited the right to their forgiveness." "Maybe," Dr. Reyes said gently, "but shouldn't that be their choice to make?" Before Russell could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from his lawyer. He glanced at it, then froze. "What is it?" Dr. Reyes asked. "Phoenix," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Phoenix was arrested." The details came in fragmented phone calls as Russell rushed through Manhattan traffic. Phoenix had been involved in a fight at school, not started by him, but finished by him when 3 older boys had cornered a smaller kid and begun taunting him about his mother's charity case cancer treatment. The fight had escalated quickly, resulting in one boy with a broken nose and another with a concussion. The charges were serious: assault, battery, potential expulsion from school just months before graduation. The other boys' families were prominent, connected, the kind of people who could make problems disappear for their children while ensuring consequences stuck to others. Russell's lawyer had learned about the situation through connections in the DA's office. "The kid needs help," he'd said bluntly. "Good legal representation, character witnesses, intervention before this derails his future." But more than legal help, Phoenix needed his father. Russell stood outside the police station in Queens, staring at the building where his son was being held. For 3 years, he'd been preparing for this moment, not this specific situation, but the moment when he would have to choose between respecting their distance and stepping up when they needed him. Through the glass doors, he could see Abeth in the waiting area. Even exhausted and worried, she was luminous, her dark hair pulled back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked older than her 41 years, worn down by 16 years of carrying the weight of the world alone. This was his chance, his opportunity to prove that the man he'd become in therapy, in charity work, in the quiet moments of self-reflection, was real. that he could be the father Phoenix and Storm had never had, the partner Abeth had never been able to count on. But standing there on the sidewalk, Russell realized that none of his preparation mattered. All the therapy, all the foundation work, all the personal growth. It was meaningless if he didn't have the courage to walk through those doors and face the family he'd abandoned. Dr. Reyes had been right. He was still choosing the easy path, still making decisions based on his own comfort, rather than what was right. Not anymore. Russell Ernesto walked into the police station to meet his sons for the first time, carrying nothing but 3 years of hard-earned humility and the desperate hope that love could sometimes survive even the cruelest abandonment. Behind him, the Manhattan skyline glittered with the promises and dreams of 8 million people. Ahead of him waited the 3 people who mattered more than all the rest, combined. Chapter 9. When truth meets heart, the Queens police station smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh institutional shadows that made everyone look guilty of something. Abeth sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, watching the door for any sign of her son. Phoenix had been in custody for 6 hours. 6 hours of her mind creating increasingly horrific scenarios about what this meant for his future, his college scholarship, his entire life derailed by one moment of righteous anger. She'd called 3 lawyers, but none of them specialized in juvenile cases involving assault charges. She'd called the school, but the principal's tone had been ominous when he mentioned reviewing Phoenix's enrollment status. The worst part was that she was proud of him. According to the police report, Phoenix had walked into the cafeteria to find 3 seniors, boys from wealthy families whose parents donated generously to the school, surrounding a freshman with Down syndrome, mocking his stutter while filming it for social media. One of them had said something about retards like your cancer brother, and Phoenix had snapped. The fight had been brief but decisive. Phoenix might be 16, but he was 6'2" and had spent years channeling his protective instincts into boxing at the local gym. The 3 boys hadn't expected the charity case kid to fight back so effectively. Abeth? She looked up to see a man in an expensive suit approaching, and her breath caught in her throat. 16 years had changed Russell Ernesto, but not in the ways she'd expected. He was still devastatingly handsome. The silver at his temples only made him more distinguished, and the lines around his eyes spoke of hard-earned wisdom rather than mere age. But it was his posture that surprised her most. Gone was the entitled bearing of old money aristocracy. This man moved with the careful humility of someone who had learned to question his place in the world. Russell. His name felt strange on her lips after all these years. What are you doing here? I heard about Phoenix. I want to help. The simple statement hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Abeth studied his face, looking for the calculated manipulation she remembered, the political maneuvering that had characterized every interaction with his family. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like fear. Help, how? Her voice was carefully neutral. I brought my attorney. Mason, he's the best juvenile defense attorney in the state. He's handled cases like this before, knows how to work with the DA's office. Russell paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that was achingly familiar. I also spoke with the families of the other boys involved, made it clear that if they pursue serious charges, certain information about their own children's behavior might become public knowledge. What kind of information? The kind that comes from having unlimited resources and very little patience for bullies who target disabled children. His amber eyes, Phoenix's eyes, were hard as granite. Let's just say their parents are suddenly interested in resolving this quietly. Despite herself, Abeth felt a flutter of the old attraction. This was the man she'd fallen in love with. Protective, capable, willing to use his power for something meaningful. But 16 years of abandonment couldn't be erased by one grand gesture. "Why?" she asked simply. Russell was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because he's my son. Because I've missed 16 years of protecting him, and I'll be damned if I miss this chance to help him when he needs it most. He doesn't know you're his father. Not really. He knows your name, knows you exist, but he's never thought of you as his father. I know." The admission seemed to cost him something. "But that doesn't change what he is to me." Before Abeth could respond, a door opened and Phoenix emerged with a police officer. Even in handcuffs, he moved with the same controlled grace that Russell possessed, his amber eyes scanning the waiting area until they found his mother. The relief on his face was so profound that Abeth's heart clenched. Then Phoenix's gaze shifted to Russell, and everything changed. For a moment, father and son simply stared at each other across the institutional beige of the police station. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same bone structure, the same intense eyes, the same way of holding themselves like they were ready for either conversation or combat. "Phoenix," Abeth said gently, I know who he is." Phoenix's voice was carefully controlled, but Abeth could hear the storm brewing underneath. "The question is, what's he doing here?" Russell stepped forward slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "I heard you were in trouble. I came to help." "Help?" Phoenix's laugh was bitter. "Where was your help when Storm was so sick he couldn't get out of bed for 3 months? Where was your help when Mom was working 4 jobs and still couldn't pay rent? Where was your help when I had to drop out of boxing because we couldn't afford the gym membership?" Each word hit Russell like a physical blow. Abeth watched him absorb the pain without defending himself, without making excuses. The old Russell would have deflected, would have found ways to minimize his culpability. This man just stood there and took it. "You're right," he said quietly. "I wasn't there when you needed me most. I can't undo that, and I won't insult you by pretending otherwise." "Then why?" "Because maybe I can be here now." Russell's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking slightly. "Because your mother has carried this burden alone for 16 years, and maybe it's time someone helped her carry it." Phoenix looked to Abeth, confusion flickering across his features. This wasn't the conversation he'd expected, wasn't the father he'd built up in his mind. The man standing before him wasn't making grand proclamations or demanding forgiveness. He was just present. "The charges," Abeth said. "Can you really make them go away?" "Already done," Russell replied. "Marcus spoke to the DA 20 minutes ago. Phoenix will need to do community service and attend anger management counseling, but there won't be any permanent record. His scholarship is safe." Relief flooded through Abeth so powerfully she had to grip the chair to stay upright. 16 years of fighting bureaucracy alone, and Russell had solved their biggest crisis with a few phone calls. The unfairness of it was staggering. "What do you want in return?" Phoenix asked suspiciously. "Nothing," Russell said, and the honesty in his voice was impossible to fake. "I want nothing from you except the chance to prove that I'm not the man I was 16 years ago." "People don't change." "I did." Russell's amber eyes met Phoenix's identical ones. "It took 3 years of therapy, a complete restructuring of my life, and the humiliation of watching my family's crimes exposed on international television. But I did." Phoenix was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, "Storm wants to meet you," Phoenix said finally. "But not because he's ready to forgive you or wants a father figure. He says he needs to understand what kind of man abandons his family before he can decide whether that man deserves any place in our lives." Abeth's head snapped up. "Phoenix." "And I want to watch you try to explain yourself," Phoenix continued, his amber eyes hard. "I want to see if you'll lie to our faces the way you lied to Mom 16 years ago." Storm thinks people can change. I think people just get better at hiding who they really are. Russell's face went very still. And you? What do you want? Phoenix studied the man who shared his DNA, but not his history, weighing 16 years of resentment against the evidence of his eyes. This wasn't the monster he'd imagined. This was just a man who had made terrible choices and was trying to live with the consequences. I want to understand how someone walks away from their pregnant girlfriend and convinces himself he's doing the right thing, Phoenix said, his voice sharp with 16 years of accumulated anger. I want to know what kind of man can live in luxury while his children grow up poor and then show up with lawyers when it's convenient. I looked back every single day, Russell said quietly. I just convinced myself that staying away was protecting you instead of abandoning you. Protecting us from what? Your money? Your help? Your presence at birthdays and school plays and hospital visits? Phoenix's voice was rising despite his mother's warning look. Or were you protecting yourself from having to face what you'd done? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Russell met his son's amber eyes, so like his own, without flinching. Both, he admitted. I was protecting myself from your mother's justified anger, and from my own guilt. I told myself noble lies about keeping you safe from my family's toxicity, but the truth is I was a coward who chose the easy path over the right one. The honesty was brutal and unexpected. Phoenix had prepared for excuses, for justifications, for the kind of political doublespeak that powerful men use to avoid responsibility. He hadn't prepared for someone to simply accept fault without trying to minimize it. Storm's treatment, Phoenix said suddenly. Someone paid for it, anonymously. Was that you? Russell nodded. I had to do something. When I learned he was sick, that you needed money for his care, I couldn't just stand by and watch him suffer because of my mistakes. So you've been watching us? Abeth's voice was sharp. Not watching, just aware. Making sure you were safe, that Storm was getting the best care possible. I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I needed to know you were okay. For how long? 3 years. Since I started therapy and realized what I'd really lost. The admission settled over them like snow, cold and transformative. 3 years of anonymous protection, of quiet intervention, of a father trying to care for his children from a distance because he believed he'd forfeited the right to do it openly. I need to think, Phoenix said finally. This is a lot. Of course, Russell said immediately. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Why should we believe that? The challenge in Phoenix's voice was clear. You left before. Because I'm not the same man who left, Russell replied. And because I've spent 3 years learning that the only thing worse than facing your mistakes is running from them. As they prepared to leave the station, Phoenix, hanging back while Abeth gathered her things, he found himself studying Russell with new eyes. The man who had haunted his imagination for 16 years was smaller than he'd expected, more human. Flawed and broken in ways that money couldn't fix. One question, Phoenix said as they walked toward the exit. Anything. Do you love her? Still? Russell stopped walking, his face going very still. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with 16 years of suppressed longing. Every day of my life. She's the only woman I've ever loved, and losing her was the biggest mistake I've ever made. Phoenix nodded once, filing the information away. As they stepped into the Queen's sunshine, he made a decision that would change all their lives. Storm gets out of the hospital Friday, he said. If you want to meet your sons, be at Mom's apartment at 7 p.m. Don't bring lawyers or reporters or any of that rich guy nonsense. Just be a father. Russell's breath caught. Phoenix, don't make me regret this, Phoenix said fiercely. Don't you dare make me regret giving you this chance. As they walked away, Abeth caught her son's arm. Are you sure about this? Phoenix looked back at the man standing alone outside the police station, watching them leave with an expression of desperate hope. No, he admitted, but Storm deserves to make his own choice about our father. And maybe we all deserve to know who we could have been if things had been different. For the first time in 16 years, the Blase family was about to become something more complicated than abandoned and abandoned. They were about to become a family, trying to figure out if love could bridge the gap that fear had created. The answer would change everything. Chapter 10. Love's Ultimate Victory. 6 months after that first tentative meeting in Abeth's Queen's apartment, Madison Square Garden hummed with the electric anticipation that only comes before truly historic performances. 20,000 people filled every seat, while millions more around the world prepared to watch the live stream of what Rolling Stone had already declared the most anticipated concert of the decade. In the weeks following Phoenix's arrest, the Blase family had slowly, carefully begun the delicate process of rebuilding what had been shattered 16 years ago. It started with Sunday dinners, awkward, stilted affairs where Russell brought takeout from expensive restaurants, and the boys asked pointed questions about his transformation. Storm, with his intuitive wisdom, had been the first to see past the hurt to the man underneath. Phoenix, protective and skeptical, had taken longer to trust the father who was working so hard to prove himself worthy of the title. Abeth had been the most resistant to letting Russell back into their lives, but even she couldn't deny the changes in him. This wasn't the entitled heir who had walked away from their love for political convenience. This was a man who showed up consistently, who listened more than he spoke, who asked how he could help rather than assuming he knew what was best. Tonight's concert was supposed to be Abeth's triumph, the culmination of her meteoric rise from abandoned single mother to international sensation. The Phoenix Rising Tour had sold out venues around the world, but Madison Square Garden was special. This was New York, the city where her dreams had been born and shattered and reborn again. Backstage, Abeth stood before her dressing room mirror, applying the final touches of makeup that would transform her into the goddess her fans expected to see. The emerald green dress she wore was a custom creation that flowed like liquid silk, reminiscent of the gown she'd worn to that first gala so many years ago, but infinitely more sophisticated. Her dark hair cascaded in waves over bare shoulders, and her storm-gray eyes held the confidence of a woman who had survived everything life could throw at her. 30 minutes, Miss Blas, her stage manager called through the door. Ready as I'll ever be, she called back, though her hands were trembling slightly with nerves. A soft knock interrupted her meditation. Mom? Storm's voice was stronger than it had been in months, the experimental treatment having worked better than anyone dared hope. Come in, sweetheart. Storm entered with Phoenix close behind, both boys devastatingly handsome in the matching black suits Russell had bought them for the occasion. At 17 now, they'd grown into themselves, Storm gaining weight and color as his health improved, Phoenix's protective edge softening as he learned to trust that their family was finally stable. You look incredible, Phoenix said, pressing a kiss to her cheek. Nervous? Terrified, Abeth admitted. This feels bigger than performing. This feels like closing a chapter and starting a new one. Because you are, Storm said with his characteristic directness. Tonight isn't just about your music, Mom. It's about showing the world who you really are. Before Abeth could ask what he meant, another knock came at the door. This time, Russell's voice. Abeth. May I come in? The boys exchanged a look before Phoenix called out, Yeah, come in. Russell entered carrying a small velvet box, his own formal wear impeccable but somehow less important than the nervous hope in his amber eyes. Over the past 6 months, he'd proven himself in countless small ways, attending Storm's medical appointments, helping Phoenix with college applications, supporting Abeth's career without trying to control it. But there was still a tentative quality to his presence, as if he expected to be asked to leave at any moment. "I wanted to give you something before you went on," he said, offering the box to Abeth with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside was a necklace unlike anything she'd ever seen, a phoenix rising, crafted from diamonds and emeralds with such artistry that the bird seemed to move in the light. But it wasn't the expense that made her breath catch. It was the meaning. "Russell, it's beautiful, but—" "It's not a romantic gesture," he said quickly, reading her hesitation. "It's an acknowledgement. You are the phoenix, Abeth. You rose from the ashes of what my family did to you and became something magnificent. I wanted you to have something that honored that strength." Storm stepped forward to help clasp the necklace around his mother's neck, his thin fingers gentle with the delicate chain. In the mirror, the phoenix caught the light and seemed to come alive against Abeth's throat. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning it more than he could know. 5 minutes, Miss Blase. The boys headed to their seats in the VIP section, leaving Abeth and Russell alone for a moment that felt weighted with 16 years of history. "Break a leg out there," he said softly, "though I suspect you don't need luck anymore." "Russell," she started, then stopped, unsure how to voice the gratitude and confusion and possibility that swirled in her chest whenever he was near. "I know," he said gently. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight. Just sing beautifully and let the world see what I've always known, that you're extraordinary." Abeth walked onto the Madison Square Garden stage to a roar that shook the building's foundations. 20,000 people rose to their feet before she'd sung a single note, their love and admiration washing over her like a tidal wave of validation. For a woman who had performed in subway stations for loose change, the moment was overwhelming in the best possible way. "New York," she called into the microphone, her voice carrying perfectly through the arena's acoustics. "Are you ready to rise together?" The answering roar was deafening. She began with her newest songs, powerful anthems about survival and transformation that had topped charts around the world. The stage production was spectacular, with lights and video screens that turned each song into a multimedia experience. But for all the technology and pageantry, it was Abeth's voice that held the audience spellbound. Halfway through the set, she paused at the piano for a more intimate moment. "This next song," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena, "is about second chances, about the possibility that even our biggest mistakes don't have to define us forever. It's called The Father I Never Knew." In the VIP section, Phoenix and Storm sat forward as their mother began to sing. The song was new. They'd never heard it before, and as the lyrics unfolded, they realized she was singing about Russell. "He was young and scared and drowning in his family's lies, made a choice that broke us both, said his last goodbye. I spent 16 years believing love could die, but some hearts keep beating even when they say they're done. Now I see the man he's fighting to become. See the father in his eyes when he looks at our sons. And I wonder if the bridges that we burned could be rebuilt by everything we've learned." The arena was completely silent except for Abeth's voice and the piano. In the VIP section, Russell sat with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the grace of a woman who could transform their pain into something beautiful. But Abeth wasn't finished. As the song ended, she stood from the piano and walked to center stage. The lighting shifted, creating an intimate circle that made 20,000 people feel like they were sharing a private moment. "There's someone here tonight," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do, "who spent 16 years believing he didn't deserve forgiveness. Someone who made terrible mistakes, but has spent every day since trying to become worthy of the family he lost." The camera crews, broadcasting live around the world, focused on her face as she continued. I spent 16 years angry, 16 years believing that some hurts are too deep to heal, but watching this man become the father our sons deserved, seeing him put their needs above his own comfort, has taught me something important. Love isn't just about the promises we make, it's about the promises we keep, even when keeping them is harder than breaking them. The arena held its collective breath as Abeth looked directly at the VIP section. Russell Ernesto, would you please come up here? The roar from the crowd was instantaneous and deafening. Cameras captured every step as Russell made his way through the arena, his face a mask of wonder and terror. When he reached the stage, Abeth took his hand and led him to center stage, where 20,000 people and millions watching around the world could see them clearly. "This man," Abeth said into the microphone, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena, "destroyed my heart 16 years ago. He chose fear over love, convenience over courage. He walked away from me and the children I was carrying because it was easier than fighting for us." Russell stood beside her, not defending himself, not trying to soften her words. He'd learned to let the truth stand without explanation. "But this man," Abeth continued, "also spent 3 years in therapy learning to be better. He built schools for children who needed them. He created a foundation to help families like ours. He showed up when our son was in trouble, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He proved that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be permanent, that love can survive even the cruelest abandonment." She turned to face him fully, the phoenix necklace catching the stage lights. "I don't know what our future looks like," she said, speaking to him but letting the world hear. "I don't know if we can rebuild what we lost or if we're meant to build something entirely new. But I know that I'm tired of carrying anger like armor. I know that our sons deserve to see their parents choose love over fear." Russell took the microphone with shaking hands, his voice barely controlled as he addressed the arena full of strangers who had become witnesses to his redemption. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said, his words carrying clearly through the arena. "I'm not asking for a second chance I don't deserve. I'm just asking for the opportunity to spend every day of the rest of my life proving that the man I am now is worthy of the love I was too cowardly to fight for 16 years ago." He handed the microphone back to Abeth, then knelt on the stage in front of 20,000 people and millions more watching around the world. "I love you," he said, his voice carrying without amplification. "I loved you at 25. I loved you when I walked away, and I've loved you every day since. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life showing you that love can be stronger than fear." Abeth looked down at the man kneeling before her, the father of her children, the destroyer of her dreams, the unexpected catalyst for her greatest triumph. The arena was so quiet that her whispered answer carried to every seat. "Yes." The word was barely audible, but it shattered the silence like a gunshot. As Russell rose to his feet, as Abeth stepped into his arms, as 20,000 people erupted in the loudest ovation in Madison Square Garden's history, something magical happened. Phoenix and Storm appeared on stage, having somehow made their way from the VIP section during the chaos. The four of them stood together in the spotlight, a family that had been broken and rebuilt, stronger for having survived the breaking. Fireworks exploded above the arena. Confetti cannons filled the air with gold and emerald streams. The cameras captured every moment as the blasé Ernesto family embraced, while the world watched love triumph over every obstacle that had tried to destroy it. Later that night, in a private ceremony at a small chapel in Brooklyn, Abeth Blaze married Russell Ernesto with their sons as witnesses and their love as proof that some stories are worth the long wait to finish properly. As a wedding gift, Russell signed over a significant portion of his remaining fortune to establish a joint trust, making them true partners in every sense. Together, they would expand the Phoenix and Storm Foundation. Together, they would navigate the complexities of blending their vastly different worlds. Together, they would continue raising their sons and build something meaningful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. It wouldn't be easy. Abeth still had moments of doubt. Phoenix still struggled with anger toward the father who'd missed so much, and Storm still faced ongoing medical monitoring. But they were facing it together, as a family that had learned the difference between perfect love and real love. And in the years that followed, when people asked how love could survive such devastation, Abeth would smile and say simply, "Some hearts are too stubborn to stay broken. They just need time to remember how to beat in rhythm again." Outside the chapel, Phoenix and Storm stood in the New York night, watching their parents dance to music only they could hear. "Think they'll make it this time?" Phoenix asked his twin. Storm, cancer-free and 17 and wise beyond his years, smiled the smile of someone who had learned that miracles were worth believing in. "Look at them," he said simply. "They already have." As dawn broke over New York City, the most powerful love story of the digital age was complete. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Because sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding failure, but from proving that failure doesn't have to be final. Love, after all, is the ultimate phoenix, capable of rising from any ashes strong enough to withstand the fire.